Mountain man finds obese woman tied up with one sign. His daughter cries, "Mommy, $1 is too much for a fat pig like that." The man's voice cracked across the market square of Copper Creek like a whip, followed by an ugly roar of laughter. Autumn wind carried the stench of spilled beer and rotten vegetables, but nothing smelled fouler than the words being thrown at the girl tied to the auction post. Eleanor O'Shea stood with her wrists bound high above her head, back pressed to rough timber, rope cutting into swollen skin. Around her neck hung a crooked plank of wood splashed with red paint that had begun to drip in the cold. For sale, $1, clearance stock. Her dress, once a plain but decent brown, was torn at the seams from too many hands shoving and grabbing. Mud and old fruit clung to the hem. Her dark hair, tangled and greasy from days without washing, fell over her cheeks in dull clumps. Blue eyes that had once held a fragile kind of hope now stared forward, glassy and hollow, like a doll someone had dropped and never bothered to pick up. She had no tears left. They had been spent on the ship from Ireland, on nights in the cramped boarding house, and finally in the small room of the man who had bought her as a mail-order bride and decided she wasn't worth the money. $30 I paid for this useless sow," Hutchins bellowed, face flushed crimson under his sweat-stained hat. His belly strained against his vest, his thick fingers clutching a length of leather strap. "The company promised me a pretty Irish lass. Instead, they sent me a barrel of lard. Can't cook, can't keep silent, can't please a man. What good is she?" The strap snapped across Eleanor's shoulder. She flinched, jaw tightening, but made no sound. Tomatoes flew from the crowd, more red splattering across her dress. Someone tossed a cabbage core. Someone else spat. $1, Hutchins shouted, pacing before her. "Just $1. Strong back, big arms, eats anything, works like a mule. Who'll take her off my hands?" The crowd jeered and hooted, but no one stepped forward. $1 was still one day's wages for a laborer. Why spend it on a girl whose humanity had been torn away and priced like spoiled meat? $50, someone yelled. "She'll eat more than she earns." "Give her to the butcher," another snickered. "He can weigh her on his scale." A stone skidded past Eleanor's bare foot. Pain pulsed up her leg, but inside she felt nothing. Somewhere in the back of her mind she remembered Emerald Hills and her mother's voice singing in Gaelic. That world was gone. All that remained was a wooden sign and a price. $1! Hutchins roared again, raising his strap as if he might strike her simply for standing there and breathing. The crowd parted for a moment, the way water splits around a rock. In that brief opening, a shadow fell across the post. Eleanor didn't look up at first, until a small, clear voice cut through the laughter. "Daddy, that's Mommy." Eleanor's head jerked toward the sound. At the edge of the square, a giant of a man stood utterly still, a little girl tucked against his side, her tiny hand clutching his coat. The man's gray eyes were fixed on Eleanor. The child's gaze was full of tears and something like recognition. If you're listening to this right now, tell me in the comments. Where in the world are you hearing Eleanor's story from? Thomas Blackwood did not belong in a place like Copper Creek. He stood at the edge of the auction square like a mountain carved into human shape, broad-shouldered, towering, wrapped in buckskin and wolf fur, as if winter itself feared him. His long black hair hung damp from morning mist, and his beard shadowed half his face. But it was his eyes, cold, sharp gray, that silenced even the most drunken heckler when he looked their way. Beside him, holding his huge hand with both of her small ones, was a little girl about 5 years old. She wore a faded blue dress and scuffed leather boots. Her hair, black like her father's, curled softly at the ends. But her eyes were the color of the shallow lake behind their cabin, pale blue, bright, gentle, the color her mother used to have. Lily tugged on Thomas's sleeve again, chin trembling. "Daddy, that's Mommy. She came back." Thomas knelt slowly to face her. "Lily," he said softly, "we've talked about this. Mommy is gone." But Lily shook her head hard, tears spilling over. "No, that's her. I know it. I feel it. Daddy, please. She looks sad. We have to help her." Thomas turned his face toward the girl tied to the post. Eleanor O'Shea. He didn't know her name yet. All he saw was a wounded creature, cold, filthy, beaten into submission, soft around the edges the way his Sarah had once been, yes, but not the same. Sarah had been small, delicate, always smiling. This girl was nothing like her. And yet, her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, filled with the same aching sorrow he had once seen in Sarah's during her last winter, when she had sensed something was wrong with her pregnancy, when she begged him to put Lily first, no matter what happened. That memory punched the breath from his chest. "Daddy," Lily whispered again, voice breaking, "please bring Mommy home." Thomas closed his eyes. He had spent 5 years trying to give Lily everything except the one thing she cried for every night, a mother, and here, in front of him, was a stranger with the same eyes as the woman he had loved and buried. A stranger who, for one desperate little girl, could be everything she needed. He stood. The crowd parted fast when they saw the mountain man approaching. No one wanted trouble with Thomas Blackwood. Rumors said he'd killed men. Some said he'd killed his own wife. Others swore he lived with wolves. People feared him, respected him, gave him space. He stopped in front of Hutchins. "I'll buy her." The square went silent. Hutchins blinked, then grinned a greasy, gap-toothed grin. "Blackwood, didn't expect to see you in town. $1, cash, on the spot." Thomas reached into his coat, pulled out a silver dollar, and tossed it. Hutchins snatched it greedily. "Pleasure doing business." Thomas had already stepped past him. He stood before Eleanor. Up close, she looked worse. Her lips were split, face bruised, arms covered in welts and fresh cuts. She was trembling, but not from the cold. She was afraid of him. He didn't blame her. Thomas pulled a hunting knife from his belt. He saw her flinch, eyes widening in terror. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted the blade and cut through the rope binding her. Her arms fell limp at her sides, circulation stinging them awake. She gasped softly, swallowing pain. "Can you walk?" he asked gruffly. Her voice barely came out. Yes, sir." He didn't answer. Instead, he sheathed his knife and stepped back so Lily could run forward. The little girl threw her arms around Eleanor's waist with the kind of desperate trust only a child can give. "Mommy," she whispered, burying her face in Eleanor's torn dress. "You came back to me." Eleanor froze. No one had hugged her in years. No one had called her anything except insults. She didn't know how to hold a child. She didn't know how to be wanted. But Lily clung to her as if she would fall apart otherwise. Something inside Eleanor cracked. Her arms came up slowly, shakily, and she held the little girl to her chest. Tears, uninvited, unstoppable, slipped down her cheeks. Thomas watched the scene, jaw tightening. He hadn't expected the sight of them together to hit him so hard, but it did. God, it did. He cleared his throat. "We're leaving." Eleanor nodded quickly, releasing Lily only when Thomas lifted his daughter into his arms. The girl's small hands reached for Eleanor again, refusing to break the connection. Thomas placed a heavy fur cloak over Eleanor's shoulders without warning. She stiffened at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't respond. Thomas Blackwood didn't save people. He didn't play hero. He didn't interfere with other men's business. But a $1 girl with his dead wife's eyes, a child begging for a mother, a heart he'd buried but never truly let go of, he could not walk away from that. "Let's go," he said, voice low. And in front of the entire town of Copper Creek, still stunned, still silent, the mountain man led the $1 woman and his hopeful little girl away. The trail leading out of Copper Creek twisted through tall pines and jagged stone, disappearing into the thickening forest ahead. Eleanor rode on the smaller sorrel mare, her legs trembling as she tried to balance. She hadn't ridden since she left Ireland. Her body ached from days of abuse. Her wrists burned where the ropes had cut deep, and the fur cloak Thomas had thrown over her felt far too fine for someone like her to wear. Lily rode with her father, perched on the saddle in front of him, but her little hands reached back constantly, fingertips brushing at Eleanor's sleeve, as if afraid the woman would vanish if she let go for too long. Eleanor forced a small smile each time the child touched her. She didn't understand. She didn't deserve it, but she couldn't pull away. The forest thickened as they rode deeper. Branches dripped with the smell of sap and earth. A stream rushed somewhere nearby. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. Only the clip of hooves on dirt and the sigh of wind through the needles. Thomas didn't speak, not once. He rode ahead, posture rigid, eyes fixed on the trail with a soldier's vigilance. Even from behind, he looked carved from stone, massive, immovable, unshakable. Eleanor had seen men who thought themselves strong in the mines and factories back home. Thomas Blackwood made all of them look small. Every so often, Lily turned, her voice breaking the silence. "Mommy, are you cold?" Eleanor's heart twisted painfully. "I'm all right, sweetheart." Thomas's shoulders tensed each time Eleanor answered the child. Not a flinch, something deeper, something resentful, something conflicted. Eventually, Lily drifted off to sleep, head resting on her father's chest, tiny fingers tangled in the fringe of his coat. Only then did Thomas slow his horse enough for Eleanor's mare to draw even with him. He didn't look at her. He spoke like he didn't want to speak. "You will not correct her." Eleanor blinked. "Sir?" His jaw tightened. "The child. If she calls you Mommy, you will let her." Eleanor's breath caught. "But I'm not. I know who you are and who you are not," he said, tone hardening. "But my daughter is 5 years old. She lost her mother before she could speak full sentences. She needs stability. She needs warmth. She needs someone to hold her at night and kiss her bruised knees and tell her she's safe." He finally turned his head, just enough for her to meet one storm-gray eye. "You will be that person." Eleanor felt her pulse stutter. "You want me to pretend to be her mother?" "Yes." Her throat worked. "And your wife?" His voice dropped to a cold, flat register. "No. Do not misunderstand your place." Heat rushed to her face. Shame, fear, confusion. She didn't know which feeling was strongest. Thomas continued, eyes forward again. When Lily is present, you will answer to Eleanor Blackwood. You will sit at my table, speak gently to the child, wear my wife's cloak, sleep in her old room with Lily until the nightmares stop." Eleanor swallowed. "And when Lily is not present?" He didn't hesitate. "You are help, nothing more." The words, blunt and heavy, fell between them like a stone. Eleanor nodded slowly, hands gripping the reins. "I understand, sir." Thomas's jaw twitched at the word "sir," but he didn't correct her. He simply nodded once and urged his horse forward again. They rode in silence for nearly an hour. The sun dropped lower behind the peaks, painting the sky in muted gold. Birds darted between branches. The cold sharpened. Eleanor tried to pull the cloak tighter, but the weight of it suddenly felt wrong, like she was stepping into a life that didn't belong to her. When her mare stumbled on a root, she gasped softly, clutching at the saddle horn. Thomas immediately halted his horse. He looked back sharply. "Can you ride?" I think so." He eyed her posture, her trembling hands, the way she winced when the mare shifted. Without a word, he dismounted. He lifted Lily incredibly gently from the saddle and placed her still sleeping form into Eleanor's arms. "Hold her," he said. Eleanor nodded, pressing the child close, overwhelmed by the unexpected warmth of the small body curled against her. Thomas's voice softened, though he tried to hide it. "She trusts you, more than she trusts anyone." Eleanor lowered her head. "I don't understand why." Thomas paused, breath misting in the cold air. His answer came low, rough. "She sees something in you, something she needed." Then he mounted Eleanor's mare himself, guiding the horse with one hand, while Eleanor clung to Lily behind him on the larger stallion. The trail wound higher, the air thinned, shadows stretched long across their path. Cabin smoke rose somewhere ahead through the pines, thin and gray against the fading light. Almost home. Eleanor shifted Lily against her chest and whispered to the sleeping girl, "I'll try. I promise. I'll try to be what you need." Thomas heard her. She didn't see the way his shoulders softened or the hint of grief that crossed his hardened jawline before he pushed it down again. The mountain man had brought home a stranger, a woman bought for $1, a replacement for a ghost he couldn't release, and the child believed she'd found her mother. The cabin waited ahead. So did the role Eleanor had never auditioned for. The Blackwood cabin stood at the edge of a clearing carved out from dense forest, a sturdy structure of hand-hewn logs, its roof pitched steeply against winter snows. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, scenting the air with burning pine. A little fenced garden lay dormant for the season, and beyond it, a shed, a chicken pen, and the rough outline of a hunting bench. It was a home. But to Eleanor, stepping off the horse with Lily still nestled in her arms, it felt like stepping into someone else's life. Thomas took the mare to the hitching post, checking straps and saddle with quiet efficiency. He didn't look at Eleanor until Lily stirred in her embrace, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy?" she murmured sleepily. Thomas approached and gently brushed her curls back. "We're home, little bird." Lily blinked up at him, then at Eleanor, still wearing the dead woman's cloak, still holding the child like she was precious. "Mama," Lily whispered, touching Eleanor's cheek. Eleanor's throat tightened. She forced a tender smile, though guilt stabbed deep. "Yes, sweetheart, we're home." Thomas opened the door and stepped aside. "Go in," he said. Eleanor hesitated. Something in his tone, something unreadable, made her heart stumble. But she stepped through. The cabin interior was warm, golden from the fire burning in the river-stone hearth. A wide table of polished pine stood in the center. Woven blankets draped the chairs. On the mantel were carved wooden animals, small, delicate, clearly someone's careful handiwork. And on the wall, above the hearth, a portrait, a woman with pale hair, soft features, and a gentle smile, holding an infant, eyes the same color as Lily's, Sarah Blackwood. Eleanor's breath caught. She felt like an intruder, like a thief standing in another woman's kitchen. Thomas stepped inside behind her. His gaze flicked toward the portrait, his expression tightening, softening, tightening again. "Put Lily on the bed in her room," he said quietly. "She'll sleep the rest of the afternoon." Eleanor nodded and carried the girl into the smaller bedroom, a cozy space with quilts and toys carefully arranged as if someone had once loved decorating it. She laid Lily down gently. When she returned to the main room, Thomas was at the hearth, adding wood to the fire. He didn't look up when he said, "Your chores start today." Her hands fidgeted with the cloak. "Chores? You will cook, clean, mend clothes, keep the garden in season, make sure Lily stays out of trouble." His voice was flat even. Everything Sarah did. The cloak suddenly felt heavier. Eleanor swallowed. I'll do my best, Mr. Blackwood." A slow, dangerous quiet filled the room. Thomas turned his head slightly, eyes cutting toward her. "You will not call me that." Her pulse jumped. "Then, what should I call you?" He faced her fully now, the firelight painting harsh shadows on his features. "Thomas," he said, "when Lily is not here, you call me Thomas. And when she is?" He hesitated, just a fraction, but enough. "When she is," he said roughly, "you call me husband." Eleanor's breath snagged. Yes, I understand." He looked away first, almost as though ashamed of the words he'd forced himself to say. He moved to the kitchen shelf, pulling down a tin of flour and a slab of venison. "Cook something for supper. She likes stew, and bread, if you know how." Eleanor bit her lip. Her stomach twisted. I'll try." His eyes snapped to hers. "Trying isn't enough. Not for Lily." She lowered her gaze. "Yes." He stepped past her, grabbing his coat. "I'll be outside splitting wood." He walked out into the cold like a man escaping his own house. The door closed behind him with a heavy thud. Eleanor stood alone in the warm cabin, the silence pressing on her shoulders. She looked around, the blankets, the dishes, the portrait of Sarah watching over it all. She whispered to the empty room, "I don't belong here." But she moved toward the stove anyway. She found potatoes in a sack, onions in a jar, dried herbs. Sarah must have grown years earlier. Her movements were clumsy at first. She'd cooked in Ireland, but never in an American hearth. Still, soon the stew simmered, filling the cabin with warmth and the smell of home she'd forgotten existed. When Lily woke, she bounded into the kitchen, sniffing excitedly. "Mama made stew. Mama always made stew." Eleanor knelt and brushed Lily's hair tenderly. "I hope it tastes like you remember." Lily smiled, glowing, and Eleanor's heart cracked open a little more. Thomas came in at dusk, snow dusting his coat, breath fogging the air. He stopped short when he smelled the stew. The flicker in his eyes, so brief she almost missed it, was something like shock or grief, or maybe both. He sat at the table. Lily scrambled into the chair beside him. Eleanor served them quietly. When Thomas tasted the stew, his hand paused on the spoon. Lily grinned at Eleanor. "She made it just like Mommy used to." Thomas swallowed slowly. "Sarah used time," he murmured. "I found a jar," Eleanor said softly. "I hoped it was still good." Something passed across his face, an emotion so raw it almost scared her. He didn't speak again during dinner, but he ate every bite. Afterward, as Lily played with her carved wooden animals, Eleanor washed dishes at the basin. Thomas came to stand beside her, drying plates silently. "You cooked well," he said, voice deep and restrained. "Thank you," she whispered. "But don't mistake tonight for acceptance," he added, tone sharpening. "This is temporary. For Lily." She nodded. "I know." He looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to see who she truly was beneath fear and bruises and borrowed clothes. Then he said the words she hadn't expected. "You are not Sarah," he murmured. "Don't try to be." Her chest tightened painfully. "Then, what do you want me to be?" His answer was quiet, honest, bleak. "Someone who won't leave my daughter alone in this world." Before she could respond, he stepped away, turning toward the window where night pressed against the glass. The snow was falling again. Eleanor stood at the sink, hands trembling in the warm water, realizing something stark and frightening. Thomas Blackwood didn't need a wife. He needed a ghost to stop haunting him and a mother to heal his child. And she, a woman bought for $1, was expected to be both. Snow blanketed Copper Creek for the next several weeks, muting the world into a white hush. Life in the Blackwood cabin settled into a fragile rhythm, fragile because every step Eleanor took felt like walking across thin ice, never knowing when it might crack beneath her. Lily blossomed, Thomas hardened, and the town began to whisper. It started the first time Thomas rode down for supplies, taking Eleanor and Lily with him. They entered the general store, Lily hopping excitedly between them, clutching Eleanor's hand as if terrified she might disappear. "Mama, Mama, look, they have lemon drops," she squealed. Eleanor hesitated. The word Mama still felt like both a blessing and a lie. Thomas nodded. "Get her some." Eleanor grabbed a small paper bag and placed a handful of treats inside. When she stepped to the counter, the shopkeeper froze. Mrs. Halberd was a thin woman with sharp eyes and a mouth that always seemed to sneer by accident or by habit. Nobody knew which. She scanned Eleanor up and down, gaze lingering on the bruises still fading around her wrists. Then she said loudly, so the entire store could hear, "Well, well, that was fast." Eleanor blinked. "Fast? What?" Mrs. Halberd's lips curled. "Replacing Sarah." The room fell unnaturally silent. Even Lily looked up in confusion. Eleanor's face burned. "I'm not—" "Oh, come now," the woman continued, leaning on the counter. "Everyone knows Thomas Blackwood dragged home some woman from the auction block. And look at you, wearing Sarah's cloak, holding her child, standing at her husband's side." She clucked her tongue. "A month after the poor woman's been dead 5 years? Some people have no shame." Lily stiffened like a deer sensing danger. Her little hand squeezed Eleanor's tightly. Thomas stepped forward, slowly, dangerously, placing himself between Eleanor and the woman. "Mrs. Halberd," he said in a voice that made even the jars on the shelves seem to lean away, "you will not speak to my wife that way." The woman huffed, but her voice wavered. "I'm simply stating—" "What you're stating," Thomas interrupted, "is gossip made by people who have never carried a child through winter, never buried someone in frozen ground, and never watched a daughter cry herself to sleep for 5 years straight." Mrs. Halberd flushed dark red. Thomas leaned in close, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Say one more word, and you'll regret it." The storekeeper scrambled back. "Fine, fine. Take your things and go." Thomas paid. No one else in the shop dared breathe. He led Eleanor and Lily outside, loading supplies onto the wagon. But he said nothing, not a single word. Eleanor stood there in the cold, arms filled with food and blankets, feeling like she had committed some crime she didn't understand. When they finally rode off, Lily nestled close to Eleanor, whispering, "Don't listen to the mean lady. Mama is my mama." Eleanor stroked her hair, but her chest ached. She wasn't Lily's real mother, and Sarah's portrait still watched from the cabin wall every night. That evening, when Lily went to bed, Eleanor found Thomas outside splitting wood in the lantern light. She approached cautiously. "Thomas, what Mrs. Halberd said—" "I know," he muttered, slamming the axe down hard. "It isn't true. I never meant to replace Sarah. I could never—" "She's dead." Another slam. "You're alive." Slam. "That's enough for people to talk." "Does it bother you?" Eleanor asked quietly. He finally stopped, chest heaving in the cold air. "It bothers me when people speak like they knew her, like they knew us." "And me?" she whispered. "Does it bother you that I'm here?" His grip tightened on the axe, then loosened. When he spoke, his voice was softer, almost reluctant. "No, it doesn't bother me." Eleanor didn't realize until she exhaled how long she'd been holding her breath, but the peace didn't last. 2 days later, a knock rattled the cabin door. Thomas opened it while Eleanor stirred stew at the stove. Sheriff Granger stood outside, tall, broad, with a mustache thick enough to hold rainwater. "Blackwood," the sheriff said, tugging off his hat. "Got complaints from town. Folks say you brought home a woman from Hutchins' place, a woman folks say belonged to him." Thomas's jaw flexed. "I paid for her. She's free now." "That's what they say you think," the sheriff replied carefully. "But Hutchins is saying she stole from him. Says she owes him labor. Says you took his property." Eleanor stiffened. "I am not property." The sheriff turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, I don't care who belongs to who, but the law listens to the loudest voices, and Hutchins is yelling plenty loud." Thomas stepped forward, blocking the sheriff's view of her. "She is under my roof. That is the end of it." "I ain't here to fight you, Tom," Granger said, lifting both hands. "I'm here to warn you. The town's stirring. Folks whisperin' you killed Sarah. Folks whisperin' this girl's the reason. Bad talk travels faster than good." Thomas stiffened, not with anger, but pain. Eleanor saw it. She felt it. And for the first time, she understood. Thomas carried more than grief. He carried suspicion, accusation, rumors that had eaten him alive for 5 years. When the sheriff left, shutting the door behind him, Thomas remained still for a long time. Eleanor approached him. "Thomas, what did they say about you before I arrived?" He didn't look at her. "That I let my wife die, that I wanted to be rid of her, that I left her outside on purpose." His voice cracked. "That I didn't love her." Eleanor's chest tightened painfully. She reached out, just lightly touched his sleeve. "They're wrong," she whispered. He looked at her, then really looked. "How do you know?" "Because you look at Lily the same way you look at Sarah's grave, with love, with pain, with devotion." Her voice trembled, but stayed steady. A man who didn't love his wife wouldn't still be breaking under the weight of her memory. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something had shifted. A thread, a crack, a beginning. But before either could say more, Lily burst from her room, clutching a drawing. "Daddy! Mama!" she cried joyfully. "Look, I drew our family." Eleanor took the drawing. It showed Thomas, Lily, Sarah's grave beneath the tree, and Eleanor, standing beside Thomas, holding Lily's hand. Her throat tightened as Lily hugged her waist. "You're my mama?" Lily whispered. "You came back." Thomas swallowed hard. Eleanor blinked back tears. The snow fell quietly outside, and for a moment the cabin felt warm in a way it hadn't in years. Still, deep down, Eleanor knew something terrifying. You cannot live beside a ghost without eventually confronting it. And Sarah's shadow was growing heavier by the day. Snow fell in lazy spirals the morning Hutchins came. Eleanor was in the kitchen kneading dough, the warm scent of rising yeast filling the cabin. Lily sat nearby coloring, humming softly. Thomas was outside splitting logs, each crack of the axe echoing through the frosted trees. Everything felt almost peaceful, until the sound of hooves shattered it. Lily looked up, startled. "Mama, someone's coming." Eleanor's pulse spiked. She wiped her hands on her apron and peeked through the window. A wagon, 3 men, and in front, Hutchins. Her stomach plummeted. Thomas sensed trouble instantly. He dropped the axe, grabbed his rifle from the porch, and planted himself in front of the cabin as Hutchins climbed down, stumbling slightly from drink and arrogance. "Well, well," Hutchins sneered, adjusting the greasy collar of his coat. "Blackwood, I'm here for what's mine." Thomas didn't blink. "You have nothing here." Hutchins jabbed a finger toward the door. "That woman belongs to me. She was bought under contract. I didn't sign away my ownership, and you—" He spat onto the snow. "You took her like a damned kidnapper." "You abused her," Thomas said coldly. "Starved her, beat her, shackled her in the square. She's free now." "Actually," Hutchins said with a grin, pulling a folded paper from his pocket, "she's an indentured bride. Contract says she owes labor. That means legally she's mine until I say so." Thomas took one step forward, rage rippling through him like a storm. "You said bride. You bought her for your bed, not for labor." Hutchins smirked. "Details." Thomas raised the rifle, not at his head, but directly between his eyes. "Leave before I bury that contract beside you." 2 of Hutchins' men shifted nervously. The third put his hand on his pistol, then froze when Thomas moved the rifle a single inch in his direction. "You won't shoot," Hutchins taunted. "Town's already whispering you killed your first wife. You want them saying you killed another person? Go on, Blackwood. Make it easy for me." The words hit Thomas like a punch. His jaw tightened, but his hands stayed steady. Eleanor's heart thrashed as she watched from behind the door. Lily clung to her skirt, trembling. Eleanor knelt and whispered, "Stay here, sweetheart. Don't move." Then she stood. Something inside her, some quiet, trembling thing, rose to its feet for the first time in her life. Eleanor stepped outside. Thomas stiffened. "Get back inside." She shook her head. Hutchins' eyes gleamed. "There she is, my runaway cow." Eleanor flinched at the word. She forced herself not to shrink. "I am not your anything." "Oh, you will be," he said, grinning. "When I drag you back, you'll learn to cook right, clean right." "No." Eleanor stepped forward, voice cracking but loud. "I would rather die on this mountain than go back to you." Thomas glanced at her, surprised, almost shaken. Hutchins laughed. "Girl, no man wants you. Blackwood bought you for his daughter, not for himself. You think he'll keep you once she's over it? You're a placeholder, a fat one." Eleanor's breath faltered, but Thomas moved first. The butt of his rifle cracked against Hutchins' jaw, sending the man sprawling into the snow. His men drew their guns, but Thomas leveled his rifle with such lethal calm that they froze mid-motion. "Pick up your employer," Thomas growled, "and get off my land." Hutchins groaned, blood on his lip. "I'll be back, with the sheriff, with the town. You can't hide her forever, Blackwood." Thomas knelt down beside him, voice low and deadly. "I'm not hiding her." He stood. Then he reached back, took Eleanor's trembling hand in his. "I'm protecting my family." Hutchins' eyes widened. He scrambled back to his wagon, clutching his jaw as his men hauled him up. They rode off, wheels grinding over the snow, fading into the trees. Silence settled. Thomas turned to Eleanor. His chest heaved, not from fear, but from the weight of something unspoken. "You shouldn't have come outside," he said quietly. Eleanor looked at him, tears shining, but her voice steady. "I couldn't let you face him alone." Thomas swallowed hard. "He won't stop." "I know. You're not safe anymore." "I know that too." Thomas stepped closer, his rough hand brushing her cheek, hesitant, aching, as if afraid she might break. "You were brave," he murmured, "braver than anyone gives you credit for." She held his gaze for the first time, without fear. "Thomas," she whispered, "I won't run. Not from him, not from the past, not from whatever this is between us." He exhaled, a slow, shuddering breath, and his thumb trembled where it touched her skin. Inside the cabin, Lily peeked through the doorway, eyes wide but relieved. The family stood together on the snowy porch, fragile, tangled, and holding on. But deep in the pines, a warning hung in the cold air. Copper Creek wasn't finished with them. Night settled over the mountains like a heavy quilt. Wind whispered through the pines, snow tapped against the window panes, and the cabin glowed with the soft amber pulse of the hearth. Thomas sat alone at first, elbows braced on his knees, staring into the fire as if it might offer answers. His knuckles were still white from the way he had gripped the rifle. The anger was gone now, replaced by something harder to face. Guilt, fear, and something he dared not name. Eleanor moved quietly around the kitchen, finishing the dishes, checking on Lily, folding the blankets. The events of the day clung to her like smoke, but she carried herself with a strange, new steadiness. She had walked into the storm and come out standing. When she finally stepped into the main room, Thomas felt it before he saw it, her presence shifting the air. "You should rest," he said without turning. "I can't," she replied softly. Silence stretched, warm and uncomfortable. Eleanor approached the hearth, sinking to the rug beside him. Not too close, not far away either, just near enough for their shoulders to feel each other's heat. "Thomas," she said, voice gentle but sure, "he won't give up." "No," Thomas answered, "he won't." "And the sheriff, he might come too." "He will." Thomas rubbed his forehead. "Copper Creek will take Hutchins' side before they take ours. They always have." Eleanor stared into the flames. "Then I'm putting you and Lily in danger." His head snapped toward her. "Don't say that." "It's the truth." "It is not," he said sharply. "You didn't bring danger here. It was already hunting us." She blinked at him, stunned by the rawness in his voice. Thomas drew a slow breath. "I've been fighting ghosts for 5 years. Sarah's death, the town's whispers, my own guilt. I've been keeping everyone at arm's length, even Lily, even—" He stopped. "Even you." The unspoken words trembled between them. Eleanor looked down at her hands. "I know I'm not Sarah," she whispered. "I never tried to be. But I see her in every corner of this home. I see her in the way you look at the mountains. I see her when you flinch if I stand too close." Thomas closed his eyes. "Eleanor," he began, his voice breaking, "you aren't replacing her." She nodded, bracing herself. He turned fully toward her. "But you're filling the empty places she left behind." Eleanor froze. Wind howled outside. The fire popped. For a moment, the entire world narrowed to Thomas's battered, beautiful honesty. "I don't know what I deserve anymore," he said hoarsely, "but I know this. When you stepped out onto that porch today, when you took my hand, I felt something I haven't felt since before Sarah died." "What?" she breathed. "Hope." Her eyes glistened. She didn't reach for him. She was too afraid to presume. So Thomas reached for her instead. Rough fingertips brushed her cheek, tracing the curve of her jaw, the softness he had pretended not to notice for weeks. She leaned into his touch without meaning to, like a flower bending toward warmth. "You're safe here," Thomas murmured. Her breath hitched. "Am I?" "If you'll have this place," he said quietly, "it can be yours." Her tears fell before she could stop them. "And if I have you?" she whispered. His thumb trembled against her skin. "That," Thomas said, voice low and shaken, "is what terrifies me most." But he didn't pull away, and neither did she. Some stories begin with cruelty, but they never end there. Eleanor was once a girl priced at $1, tied to a post with strangers laughing at her pain. Thomas was once a man buried under grief, certain his heart had died the day Sarah did, and Lily was a child who believed love could return if she wished hard enough. Somehow, on a lonely mountain in Copper Creek, the three of them rebuilt each other. If you're listening right now, tell me, where in the world are you hearing this story from? Your comments turn these tales into a shared fire on cold nights. And if you still believe in love, don't go anywhere. The next story is already waiting for you. Strip for me. Mountain man orders. Obese, mail order. Bride. He saved from abuse. I paid for a bride, not a fat pig. Mortimer's shout cracked across Silver Ridge's winter market like a whip. Snow drifted lazily from a gray sky, but the air around the wooden platform in the center of town burned with humiliation. Catherine O'Brien stood on that platform with her wrists tied behind the rough post, a filthy rag knotted between her teeth. Her dress, once a modest brown cotton, hung in torn, wet strips around her soft body. One eye was swollen nearly shut, her lips split and crusted with dried blood. Egg yolk and mud streaked her freckled cheeks, mixing with the tears she no longer had the strength to shed. Mortimer, red-faced and sweating despite the cold, grabbed a fistful of her hair and yanked her head up so everyone could see. "This," he snarled, "is what the Boston agency sent me. They wrote plump in their letter. Soft and sweet, they said. But when she stepped off that coach, I thought they'd shipped a cow by mistake." Laughter roared from the circle of townsfolk. "Maybe they charged by the pound," someone jeered. "She'll eat you out of house and barn," another voice shouted. A woman in a faded shawl stepped closer, eyes sharp with contempt. "Women like her give the rest of us a bad name. Can't even be decent to look at." Mortimer ripped the gag from Catherine's mouth and shoved her shoulder. "Tell them what you are." Her voice came out in a broken rasp. I'm sorry." "Not sorry." He leaned in, his breath sour with whiskey. "Say you're a worthless sack of lard. Say it." Catherine's throat closed. The words wouldn't come. She stared at the packed snow under her boots, at the stains of spilled tobacco and old blood, wishing she could sink straight through the earth and disappear. Mortimer turned back to the crowd. Mail order agency won't take her back, so I'm stuck with damaged goods. Anyone want her? She can scrub floors and slop hogs. You don't even have to pay. Take her off my hands and I'll call it even. A drunk stumbled forward, leering. His hand slid along Catherine's thigh through the torn fabric. Reckon she'd make a good night's entertainment. The crowd howled. Catherine flinched but couldn't move away. Rope bit into her wrists. Her bruised shoulders trembled under the cold. For a heartbeat, the noise of the market blurred. The jeers, the clatter of wagon wheels, the hiss of wind between false front buildings. Then one sound cut clean through everything. Enough. The single word came from the back of the crowd, low and flat, but it rolled over the square like distant thunder. People shifted aside almost instinctively, creating a path without realizing they were doing it. A tall figure stepped into view, broad shoulders wrapped in a bearskin coat, snow caught in dark hair and beard, eyes the hard, dangerous blue of high mountain ice. Nathaniel Thorne, the man mothers used to frighten their children into coming home before dark, stood staring up at Catherine as if Mortimer and the gawking crowd didn't exist. For the first time all day, she wasn't looking at faces twisted with disgust. She was looking into eyes that held something else entirely. If you're listening to this right now, tell me, where in the world are you hearing Catherine's story from? Drop it in the comments so she doesn't have to stand on that platform alone. Mortimer tried to laugh it off at first, but the sound died in his throat when Nathaniel's gaze finally shifted to him. "This is none of your concern, Thorne," he blustered, tugging his vest into place as if that could make him look bigger. "Woman's mine, paid for her fair and square." Nathaniel's eyes drifted from Mortimer's flushed face to Catherine's wrists, to the raw rope burn and the bruises along her upper arms, then to the egg sliding slowly down her shoulder. The muscle in his jaw ticked once. "She's not a hog at auction," he said quietly. "You tied a human being to a post in the middle of town." "What else am I supposed to do?" Mortimer threw his arms wide toward the crowd, trying to reclaim them. "They cheated me, promised me a pretty bride, sent me this instead. I'm the victim here." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others suddenly unsure. Catherine swayed on her feet. The world blurred at the edges. She heard their words as if from underwater: hog, lard, wrong goods. A life that had already been nothing but scraping and apologizing now hung on whether a drunken man could convince a bored crowd she wasn't worth the space she took up. She'd left Ireland with a small trunk and a smaller collection of hopes. In Boston, the agency clerk had barely looked at her as he shoved papers across the desk. "You understand, Miss O'Brien. No refund, no return. You go where you're sent and you do your duty. It's better than starving, isn't it?" At the time, she'd thought he was right. Now, standing with her back to rough wood, she wondered if dying quietly in some damp Dublin alley wouldn't have been kinder. Nathaniel set a gloved hand on the platform's edge and vaulted up in one smooth motion. The boards creaked under his weight. Up close, he was even larger, shadows of old scars disappearing into his beard and hair. Catherine felt small and ridiculous, wrapped in filth beside him, like a broken thing someone had left out in the snow. "Untie her," he said. Mortimer snorted. "She'll bolt soon as you do. Besides, she owes me. Work, humiliation, whatever I say until I decide I've had my money's worth." Nathaniel tilted his head, studying him. "How much did you pay?" Mortimer blinked. "What? How much?" Nathaniel repeated. "Did she cost you?" $35, Mortimer said warily, "plus the wire fees and—" Nathaniel reached into his coat, pulled out a leather pouch, and dropped it onto the wooden crate beside Mortimer with a heavy clink of metal. The sound cut through the murmurs like a church bell. "50, Nathaniel said. "That covers your bride, your fees, and whatever you think your pride is worth. You open that pouch, you walk away, and you never lay a hand on her again." Mortimer stared at the pouch as if it were a rattlesnake. "You're insane. Nobody pays over value for a mistake like her." Nathaniel's eyes sharpened. "You're right. I'm not paying for her. I'm paying you to leave town before I decide to collect what you owe that woman in broken bones instead of coins." The tone of his voice, low and almost bored, made several men in the crowd take an involuntary step back. They remembered stories about a winter poker game that had ended with a man thrown out into the snow, about a drunk who tried to draw on Nathaniel and woke up 3 days later missing 2 fingers. Mortimer swallowed. His gaze skittered from Nathaniel to Catherine. She couldn't even look at him. She stared at her boots, at the mud and ice, her cheeks burning. "She's damaged goods," he muttered. "You'll regret—" "I asked," Nathaniel cut in, the faintest edge creeping into his voice, "how much?" Mortimer's shoulders slumped. Greed and fear wrestled briefly on his face. Greed won. He snatched up the pouch, felt the satisfying weight of real silver against his palm, and stuffed it inside his coat. "Fine. She's your problem now," he said, backing off the platform. "But don't say I didn't warn you." He disappeared into the crowd, the other onlookers parting around him. No one jeered now. No one threw anything. They watched in uneasy silence as Nathaniel turned back to Catherine. For a moment, he simply looked at her, not at her size, not at the torn fabric, at her face, at the way she could not quite bring herself to meet his eyes. "What's your name?" he asked. It took her a second to remember how to speak. "Catherine. Catherine O'Brien." His voice softened by a hair. "Catherine, I'm going to untie you. Can you stand?" She nodded, though her knees felt like wet rags. When his knife sliced through the rope, her arms dropped like stones, pain flaring all the way into her shoulders. She staggered, and his hand shot out, closing around her elbow, firm, steady, careful not to squeeze the bruises. The contact burned through the numbness more than the cold ever had. "Easy," he murmured. "I've got you." The simple words nearly undid her. Nobody had had her in a very long time. He led her down from the platform as if escorting a lady from a carriage, not dragging a disgraced purchase off a stage. The crowd parted. Those who had laughed now avoided her eyes. A few women bit their lips, shame painting their cheeks. At the edge of the square, Nathaniel stopped beside a hitching post where a massive bay gelding stamped and tossed its head. He turned Catherine to face him fully. "You're coming with me," he said. "I've paid off whatever claim that man thought he had. You owe him nothing." Her fingers knotted in the filthy fabric at her waist. "And what do I owe you?" Something unreadable moved behind his eyes. "We'll discuss that when you're not bleeding under 3 layers of grime." He boosted her into the saddle as if she weighed nothing at all, swung up behind her, and wrapped one arm lightly around her so she wouldn't slide off. The other hand took the reins. As they rode out of town, the square fell away behind them. The wind stung Catherine's battered skin, but it tasted like freedom for the first time since she'd set foot on American soil. They reached the small boarding house on the outskirts of town as the sky began to fade from iron gray to early twilight. Nathaniel swung down, then lifted her from the horse, setting her on her feet inside a narrow room lit by a single oil lamp. He closed the door with a quiet click. The sudden stillness pressed in. Catherine stood in the middle of the room, shivering in her borrowed coat, painfully aware of every tear in her dress, every bruise hidden beneath the fabric. Nathaniel took one long look at her, then at the basin, the pitcher of water, and the folded cloths on the table. When he spoke, his voice was low and level, but there was steel threading through it. "Strip for me, Catherine." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She flinched back, as if struck. What? His gaze met hers, hard and unflinching, and for a heartbeat she could not tell if she'd just escaped one kind of torment only to walk straight into another. For a moment, Catherine could only stare at him, breath hitching painfully in her throat. His words replayed in her mind with the same terror she had lived with for months under Mortimer's hands. "Strip for me." She backed toward the wall, clutching the edges of Nathaniel's heavy coat around her body as if it were armor. "Please," her voice cracked, "please don't. Don't make me do that. I'll work, I'll cook, clean, anything, but not that." Nathaniel didn't move. He stood with his back straight, shoulders filling the small room like a cliff face, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, those sharp, glacial eyes, softened by a degree. "I'm not asking you for anything improper," he said. Catherine swallowed, hands trembling. You said—" "I know what I said." His voice dropped lower, quieter, as if he regretted how harsh it had come out. "But listen to the rest. You're bleeding through your dress. I could smell infection the moment I lifted you off the horse. If I don't treat those wounds tonight, you'll end up dead within a week." Catherine froze. Nathaniel took one slow step forward, not looming, not threatening, just approaching like someone trying not to startle a frightened animal. "You can keep the blanket wrapped around you," he continued. "I just need access to your back and ribs, and I can't do that through torn cloth and dried blood." Catherine's chest tightened, shame burning in her stomach. All her fear, all her trembling, all the humiliation from the crowd still clung to her like grime. She looked down at her hands, clutching the coat as if it could hide everything she hated about herself. "I thought—" her voice cracked. "Everyone always wanted something from me." Nathaniel's jaw flexed once. "I'm not Mortimer." She nodded slowly, tears gathering despite her will. "I know. I'm just scared." "I can see that." For the first time since she'd met him, his tone gentled, not warm, not soft, but steadier, almost grounding. He turned his back to her and crossed the room to the small table, where he began setting out supplies: clean cloths, a pot of boiled water, a tin of salve, strips of linen. "I'm going to stand over here," he said without turning around. "You wrap the blanket around your chest and take off the dress. Tell me when you're ready." Catherine's hand shook as she reached behind her neck. The dress was stiff with dried filth, tugging painfully at the bruises beneath, but she managed to peel it down to her waist. She wrapped the wool blanket tight over her chest, covering everything. Her legs shook violently, not from cold, but from the feeling of being exposed again. even if only a little. I'm ready, she whispered. Nathaniel turned, not quickly, not suddenly. His gaze flicked to her face first, then to the blanket wrapped snugly around her shoulders. He didn't look at her body, not once. He stepped behind her. "Sit," he said. She perched on the edge of the bed. Nathaniel knelt behind her, the floorboards creaking faintly beneath his weight. The moment his fingers touched the shredded fabric, Catherine flinched. "I'm not going to hurt you," he murmured. "You might, if you touch the wrong place." "Then tell me where it hurts. I'll avoid it." She nodded, biting her lip hard enough to taste iron. Nathaniel peeled the dress away from her back. The air hit her raw skin, and she gasped. He stilled immediately. Too cold? No, just surprised. He dipped a cloth into warm water and began cleaning the wounds with slow, controlled movements. At first, every touch burned. Catherine squeezed her eyes shut, fingers twisting into the blanket at her front. "You're doing fine," he said quietly. No one had ever said that to her. When he reached the deeper lashes near her shoulder blades, she hissed. Nathaniel paused. "This part will hurt the most. I can stop if you need." Catherine shook her head quickly. "Please, finish. I want it done." So he did. Thoroughly, methodically, with a steady patience that didn't match his reputation. As he worked, Catherine found herself speaking before she realized her lips had moved. "Why did you help me?" Nathaniel didn't stop. "Because leaving you tied to that post would have made me no better than the ones who put you there." "But you aren't like them." He didn't answer. He cleaned the last wound and set the cloth aside. She heard him open the tin of salve. The smell of crushed pine, mint, and resin drifted through the air. "This will sting," he warned. It did. Catherine gritted her teeth as he massaged the ointment gently over the angry welts. Her breath trembled. She couldn't remember the last time someone touched her without cruelty in their intentions. "You have old scars," Nathaniel murmured after a moment. Heat rushed to Catherine's cheeks. "Yes." "They hurt you before today." "Yes." "Mortimer?" She hesitated. "Him and others." Nathaniel's hand froze on her skin. When he spoke again, his voice sounded darker than anything she'd heard from him yet. "Did they ever force themselves on you?" Catherine hugged the blanket tighter. "He tried. I fought." A long silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Then, slowly, Nathaniel resumed applying the salve. "Good," he said. "That you fought." He wrapped her ribs with clean linen. His fingers brushed the edge of her waist only once, accidentally. She sucked in a breath. "Did that hurt?" he asked sharply. "No," she said too quickly, "just startled." He tied the bandage carefully, not tight enough to constrict, not loose enough to slip. Then he rose to his feet. "All right, you can put your dress back on." She managed to pull the dress up under the blanket without exposing anything. When she stood, the room swayed. Nathaniel caught her elbow, not gripping, just steadying. "You haven't eaten enough," he said. "Sit. I'll bring food." Her eyes widened. "You cook?" He almost snorted. "I know how to put something over a flame. Nothing more." And then, shockingly, his lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Catherine felt warmth rise in her chest that had nothing to do with fire or ointment. She sat down obediently, the blanket still around her shoulders. Nathaniel walked toward the door, then paused, turning slightly. "And Catherine?" His voice dropped lower, almost rough. "Next time I tell you to strip, ask what I mean before you assume the worst." Her cheeks flamed. I will." He nodded once and stepped out. Catherine pressed the blanket to her heart. Shame, relief, gratitude. They tangled together until she could hardly breathe. But beneath them all was something new, something fragile and terrifying. Hope. Catherine had expected Nathaniel's cabin to be nothing more than a crude shelter, a shack built by a man who preferred wolves to people. But when they rode through the last stretch of pines and the structure came into view, she blinked in astonishment. The cabin stood on a natural rise overlooking a frozen creek, its logs darkened by years of storms, but fitted so tightly the seams were barely visible. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. A stack of neatly chopped firewood sat under an awning. A small stable leaned against the right side, its roof patched skillfully with fresh shingles. It looked lived in, cared for, strong. Nathaniel swung down from his horse and lifted Catherine off hers before she could protest. His hands wrapped around her waist only briefly, but the heat lingered long after he stepped back. "You're still weak," he said. "You'll walk slower anyway." His voice held no softness, yet no irritation either, just calm practicality. He carried her bundle of clothes and the supplies from town, pushing open the heavy wooden door with his shoulder. The warmth that spilled out wrapped around Catherine like a blanket. She stepped inside slowly. The main room was surprisingly large, with a wide stone hearth that dominated the far wall. The fire burned bright, filling the space with a golden glow. A sturdy table stood near the window, 2 chairs pulled close. Shelves lined one wall, full of jars, tools, and folded fabric. A rug, hand-woven, faded but beautiful, covered part of the wooden floor. 2 doors stood on opposite sides of the room. Nathaniel pointed at the one on the left. "That's yours. Mine is the other." Catherine swallowed, relieved he hadn't expected them to share a room. "Thank you." Nathaniel set the supplies down on the table. "You'll start working tomorrow. Today, you rest and eat." "I don't mind working now," she said quickly. "I don't want to be a burden." Nathaniel shot her a look so sharp she instantly fell silent. "You're not a burden. You're injured." Catherine lowered her gaze. No one had ever said such words to her before. "Sit," he ordered. She obeyed. He knelt by the hearth, adding another log to the fire. His movements were practiced and silent. Catherine watched the way his shoulders shifted under his shirt, the way his large hands handled even small tasks with precision. He wasn't a gentleman, she could tell that easily, but he was controlled, danger contained in discipline. It made her feel safer than she had in years. When he finished tending the fire, he ladled steaming broth from a pot hanging over the coals into a wooden bowl. "It's rabbit stew," he said. "Not much else left in the pantry." Catherine took the bowl carefully. The smell hit her first. Simple, earthy, comforting. Her eyes stung with sudden tears. She hadn't eaten food someone prepared with care, and she couldn't remember how long. She took a tentative sip and gasped softly. It was warm and rich, reminding her faintly of her mother's soups back in Ireland. Nathaniel watched her with unreadable eyes. "It's good," she whispered. "Thank you." He gave a small nod, then sat opposite her, eating in silence. For a while, only the popping of the fire and the quiet scrape of spoons filled the room. Catherine felt her muscles loosen, her mind drifting into a rare sense of safety. The cabin, the warmth, the quiet. It was as if the world outside had disappeared. But when she glanced at Nathaniel, she remembered everything she didn't understand about him, why he had saved her, why he allowed her into his home, why he looked at her sometimes like he was studying a wound he couldn't decide whether to close or reopen. After they finished eating, Nathaniel rinsed the bowls in a basin, then leaned his hands on the table, looking briefly at the floor before speaking. "You'll need to know how things work here." Catherine straightened, attentive. "I hunt and chop wood. You'll handle cooking, cleaning, mending, laundry. The cabin needs to stay warm, especially at night. If you're unsure how to do something, ask." "Yes, Nathaniel." "Good." He walked to a small chest near the wall and opened it, pulling out a stack of neatly folded blankets. "Your room is cold. These will help." He handed them to her. She brushed his fingers by accident, the briefest touch, and felt her breath catch. Nathaniel didn't react visibly, but something flickered in his gaze before he stepped back. "You should lie down." She nodded and moved toward her room. The door creaked softly as she entered. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered by a handmade quilt. A single window looked out into the pines, where the wind brushed snow from the branches in sparkling flurries. A little table stood beside the bed, with a candle stub waiting to be lit. Catherine placed the blankets at the foot of the bed, then sat, running her fingers over the quilt. It was the first time she had owned anything that felt like a home. Minutes later, there was a soft knock. Catherine opened the door to find Nathaniel standing in the doorway, not entering. "I forgot to tell you," he said. "Don't go into the woods alone. Predators come close sometimes." "I won't," she promised. He hesitated, just a breath, before nodding and walking away. Catherine closed the door gently, her heart beating too fast. She lay down, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to Nathaniel moving around in the main room. His steps were heavy and certain. The sounds were strangely calming. After a long while the cabin fell quiet. Catherine had nearly drifted to sleep when she heard it, the faintest sound from the other room, a quiet, choked breath, then another. Nathaniel. Catherine's own breath stilled. She sat up, listening, stomach twisting. He was crying, barely audible, controlled, but unmistakably crying. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stood frozen in the center of her small room, uncertain if she should go to him or leave him alone. Her heart urged her forward. Her fear kept her still. In the end, she sat back down and waited until the muffled strain of grief faded and the silence returned. She lay awake for hours, wondering who Nathaniel Thorne had been before loss carved him into the man she met today, and wondering, with a trembling ache in her chest, whether there was room in that carved-out place for someone like her. The storm arrived without warning. Morning had broken clear and soft, a wash of pale gold spilling across the mountains, and Catherine had stepped out to hang freshly washed linens on the rope line. The air smelled of pine and melting snow. For the first time since arriving, she felt peaceful, but by noon the sky had bruised into iron. Nathaniel stood on the porch, narrowed eyes scanning the shifting clouds rolling over the ridge. "A storm's heading in fast," he muttered. "Bring the linens in." Catherine hurried, folding damp cloth in her arms as the wind began to howl. Nathaniel helped her pull the last of it down, closing the cabin shutters with practiced speed. Snow began whipping through the air, swirling across the yard like shards of broken glass. Inside, he lit extra lamps and checked the fire, adding thick logs that crackled and sparked. The cabin filled with warmth again, but outside the world had turned white and furious. Catherine moved to help, her hands trembling only slightly. "Does this happen often? In the high mountains?" Nathaniel shut the door behind him. "Too often. Storms can trap you for days." He glanced at her, just a flicker, but something in his tone softened. "You'll be safe here." Safe. The word still felt foreign. As the storm roared, Catherine returned to her mending. Nathaniel took a seat at the table, oiling his rifle. The room hummed with the sounds of the storm outside and the quiet comfort of work inside. It almost felt like a real home, but the peace was not meant to last. Near dusk, Catherine went to fetch flour from the pantry. The cabinet was high, its top shelf higher still. When she stood on her toes to reach it, her fingers brushed a folded piece of paper wedged behind a jar. Curious, she tugged it free. It was a letter. Her name was written on the front. Her breath stopped. Catherine O'Brien. Her own handwriting. Her pulse pounded painfully as she unfolded it. She had written this letter 2 years earlier in Boston to her cousin Maeve, the only person she still cared about. She had slipped it into the outgoing mail at the agency's office, asking Maeve to pray for her, telling her she feared the man she had been matched with. She had hoped, foolishly, that someone might worry if she disappeared. Why was it here? Her hand shook as she scanned the envelope again. A stamp from Silver Ridge. A second stamp, reading, "Return to sender, recipient unknown." Her heart sank. Maeve had moved away. No one had cared enough to forward the letter. Catherine closed her eyes, swallowing the ache swelling in her chest. She slipped the letter back into the pantry shelf and tried to return to her tasks. But her mind spun with the reminder of how utterly alone she had been before Nathaniel. Hours later, when the storm reached its furious peak, something hit the door. 3 loud, violent thuds that echoed through the cabin. Nathaniel's head snapped up. He grabbed his rifle and stood. "Get behind me." Catherine obeyed instantly, her breath tight with fear. The pounding came again. "Thorne, open up!" Nathaniel cursed under his breath, jaw clenching. He moved to the door but didn't open it. "Who's there?" he barked. A muffled voice shouted over the storm. "Sheriff Granger, open this damn door!" Nathaniel stiffened. Catherine watched him with wide eyes. She didn't know much about the sheriff, only that the townsfolk whispered of him the way they whispered of wolves. Nathaniel cracked the door open. Sheriff Granger shoved his way in, covered in snow. He was a thick man in a heavy leather coat, his face scarred from some old fight. 2 deputies followed, stomping their boots against the floor. Nathaniel raised his rifle slightly. "You're not welcome here." "We're not here for you, Thorne," Granger said, brushing snow from his sleeves. His eyes slid to Catherine, slowly, appraisingly. "We're here for her." Catherine's body locked in place. "For me?" she whispered. Granger gave her a cold smile. "Mortimer Briggs filed a complaint. Says you stole from him. Says you attacked him and fled." Catherine's stomach dropped. "That's not true." "He paid for a bride," Granger said. "You were contracted property." "I'm not property," Catherine said, her voice shaking. Nathaniel stepped between her and the sheriff, his presence like a wall of granite. "Mortimer beat her, starved her, tried to force himself on her. I saw the state she was in." "Mortimer says you took her," Granger replied, "forced her up here." Nathaniel's jaw flexed. "She came willingly." Granger snorted. "Doesn't look like it." Nathaniel's grip tightened on his rifle. "Watch your words." The sheriff's deputies shifted uneasily. Granger huffed, wiping his fogged glasses. "Look, I don't care about your domestic situation. Town council wants her returned and the marriage completed properly." He tilted his chin toward Nathaniel. "Unless you want to be charged with kidnapping and harboring stolen property." Catherine gasped. "I'm not stolen anything." "You were bought," Granger cut in. "Same thing." Nathaniel stepped forward, eyes cold with deadly promise. "She's not going anywhere." "You don't decide that," the sheriff snapped. Nathaniel raised his rifle an inch higher. "I do now." The room froze. The deputies reached for their holsters. Catherine pressed a hand to her mouth, fear crashing over her. Granger stared at Nathaniel for a long, tense moment. "You're a damn fool," he muttered. "You can't fight the law." Nathaniel's voice was razor sharp. "I can fight anyone who comes for her." The sheriff hesitated, then jerked his head toward the door. "We'll be back with a warrant. And if you resist, Thorne, you'll hang." The storm swallowed them as they left. Nathaniel shut the door and slid the iron bolt across it. His shoulders were rigid, breath shaking. Catherine approached him cautiously. "Nathaniel?" He didn't turn. "I shouldn't have gone to town. Shouldn't have brought you here. I've put you in danger. You saved my life, and I might lose mine," he said quietly. Catherine reached out, lightly touching his arm. His skin twitched beneath her fingers. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered. "Whatever comes, I'll face it with you." Nathaniel finally turned toward her, eyes blue and stormy, full of something raw. "Catherine," he murmured, as if her name were both an ache and a relief. But before anything more could be said, the wind howled louder, rattling the cabin walls. Outside, the storm wasn't the only danger gathering. The storm raged through the night, hammering the cabin with fists of wind and needles of snow. Catherine barely slept. Every creak of wood, every snap of ice outside made her flinch. But Nathaniel didn't rest at all. She heard him pacing, checking the windows, adding wood to the fire, loading ammunition with practiced precision. When dawn arrived, pale and bitter, the storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like the world held its breath. Nathaniel stood by the window, staring down the snow-covered trail. Catherine approached quietly. "Do you think they'll come today?" she asked. "I know they will." His voice was calm, but not cold, focused, steady. The voice of a man who had fought too many battles to fear another. Catherine stepped closer. "Nathaniel, they won't listen to me. They don't care what I've suffered." "I know." He finally looked at her, his gaze piercing but warm. "That's why I'll speak for you." She swallowed hard. "You could be killed." "I've survived worse." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "But I won't let them take you. I won't lose someone again, not like before." Before she could answer, a distant crunch of boots on snow cut through the silence, then another, then many. Nathaniel moved instantly, grabbing his rifle and placing himself between Catherine and the door. "Stay behind me. No matter what happens, don't leave my side." Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. Through the window, figures emerged. Sheriff Granger, 2 deputies, and Mortimer Briggs himself, wrapped in a fur coat far too fine for a man so cruel. The bruise Nathaniel had left on his jaw was still dark, blooming purple under his jowls. They stopped 10 paces from the porch. Granger called out, voice clipped, "Thorne, step outside." Nathaniel opened the door but didn't step through. He filled the doorway like a barricade. "You're trespassing." "We have a warrant," the sheriff replied, holding up a paper that fluttered in the cold wind. "Step aside. We're taking the girl." Catherine stiffened behind him. Nathaniel didn't move. "She's not yours," Granger added. "She belongs to Briggs and the law." Nathaniel's voice dropped into a low growl. "She belongs to no man." Mortimer stepped forward, pointing a shaking finger at Catherine. "That woman is my property. The contract says—" Nathaniel raised his rifle a fraction. "One more word and I break your jaw for the second time." Mortimer stumbled back behind the sheriff. Granger sighed. "Thorne, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're not here to kill anyone, but we'll use force if we must." "I don't doubt it." Nathaniel stepped forward, boots crunching in the snow. "But you're not taking her." Granger nodded to his deputies. "Then we'll arrest you for obstruction." He reached for his gun, and Catherine stepped forward. Nathaniel's arm shot out instantly to block her, but she pushed past him, not away, just far enough to stand beside him. Granger blinked. "Girl, get away from him!" "No," Catherine said. Her voice shook, but the words didn't. "I'm not going anywhere with Mortimer Briggs. I'd rather die out here than return to him." "You don't get to choose," Mortimer snapped. Catherine turned on him, something fierce suddenly burning in her eyes. "Yes, I do." Mortimer opened his mouth, but Nathaniel stepped closer, the look on his face promising pain if Mortimer so much as breathed wrong. Sheriff Granger rubbed his forehead. "The contract is legal. If you don't return, Briggs can sue, and the court will—" "The court will do nothing," Nathaniel cut in, "because Briggs broke every term of the contract when he abused her, when he starved her, when he tried to force himself on her." His voice sharpened. "She's not his wife. She's his victim." Granger hesitated. The deputies exchanged uncertain looks. "The girl's word against his," one deputy muttered. Nathaniel's jaw locked. "Then take my word." Catherine stepped closer to him, her shoulder brushing his arm. He didn't move away this time. "Sheriff," she said softly, "I was willing to fulfill my contract. I went to him with hope, but he beat me. He humiliated me. He tried to force me." She lifted her chin, trembling but unbroken. "I would rather freeze in the snow than be owned by that man." For a long moment no one spoke. Then Granger turned slowly to Mortimer. "Is any of that true?" Mortimer sputtered. "She's lying. She's a fat little—" Nathaniel's rifle lifted in a blink. The deputies flinched. Granger held up a hand. "That's enough." He looked at Mortimer, really looked at him. Then he folded the warrant slowly and tucked it back into his coat. "This is a civil dispute," he said, "not criminal. If Briggs wants compensation, he can take it to court. But I'm not dragging a half-frozen girl away from the only man who seems willing to protect her." Catherine's breath left her in a rush. Nathaniel lowered his rifle, but his hand still trembled faintly with adrenaline. Mortimer lurched forward. "You can't leave her with him. She's mine." "No," Granger said, "she's not." He turned away. Mortimer sputtered, red-faced, but the deputies had already begun walking back down the trail. He threw one last look at Catherine, pure hatred, before stomping after them. Silence fell. Nathaniel exhaled, his breath shaking. Catherine felt tears break free, warm against the cold air. He turned toward her slowly. "You stood with me," he said quietly. "I'll always stand with you," she whispered. Nathaniel didn't kiss her. He simply reached out and took her hand. And in that simple touch, she felt the shift of something deep and irrevocable. The world had come for her, and he had refused to let it take her. "Come inside," he murmured. "You're safe now. As long as I breathe, you're safe." Night settled slowly over the mountains, wrapping the world in a deep, quiet blue. Snow clung to the pines like frosting, and smoke curled lazily from the cabin's chimney, warm, golden, alive. Inside, the fire snapped softly, filling the room with a gentle glow that pushed back every shadow. Catherine sat on a small wooden stool near the hearth, hands wrapped around a cup of hot tea Nathaniel had made for her. She still trembled, not from cold, but from the echo of fear, the memory of Mortimer's voice, of the sheriff's hard stare, of the possibility of being dragged away, but most of all from the memory of Nathaniel standing before her like a wall the world could never break. Nathaniel hung his rifle near the door and lowered himself into the chair opposite her. The weight of the day lay on his shoulders. She could see it in the way he rubbed a hand over his face, the way his breath shook faintly before he steadied it. "You should rest," he said quietly. "So should you," Catherine replied. "You fought for me." He looked at her, really looked at her, and something unreadable flickered in his eyes. "I did what anyone decent would have done." "No," she said softly, "not anyone, only you." Nathaniel's gaze drifted to the fire. The flames reflected in his eyes like gold dancing on water. His voice, when it came, was low and rough. "When I saw them at the door, something inside me broke loose. I thought I'd buried that part of myself years ago." "What part?" "The part that believes a man can save someone. The part that believes he deserves a second chance." Catherine's breath caught. "Nathaniel, your past—" He shook his head once. "Don't. Tonight isn't about what I lost." He lifted his eyes, meeting hers. "It's about what I almost lost today." Her heartbeat fluttered painfully. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "When you stepped beside me, Catherine, I've never had someone do that. Not since Margaret. Not since before life tore everything apart." Catherine swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "I wasn't brave. I was terrified. But you still stood with me." Wind brushed against the windows. The fire cracked softly. The world felt small and warm and impossibly fragile. Catherine set her cup aside and took a slow breath. "Nathaniel, am I safe here?" she asked. He looked at her with quiet intensity. "More than safe." He hesitated, searching for the right words, not grand, not poetic, just true. "This cabin, this mountain, me, it's all yours now if you want it." Her eyes filled with tears. "I've never had a home." "You have one now," he said. A tear slipped down her cheek, warm against her cold skin. Nathaniel rose and stepped toward her, not with hunger or urgency, but with a gentleness that made her chest ache. He knelt in front of her, this giant of a man, this legend of the mountains, and took her trembling hands in his. "You're safe here, Catherine," he said softly, "for as long as you'll stay." She bent forward, her forehead touching his. Their breath mingled, warm, fragile, real. "I want to stay," she whispered. "I want to stay with you." He closed his eyes as if absorbing the words into his bones. Outside, the snow fell quietly. Inside, the cabin glowed like a promise, a beginning, not an ending. Some stories begin in cruelty, in cold wind, in a woman tied to a post with strangers laughing at her pain, but they don't have to end there. Catherine found safety where she least expected it, in the arms of a mountain man who had lost everything, yet still chose to protect her. Nathaniel found hope again in a woman the world called worthless, but who stood beside him when it mattered most. Wherever you're listening from, whatever country, whatever hour, I'm grateful you're here. Tell me, where in the world are you hearing this story from? And if you still believe in love's quiet miracles, stay close. The next story is already waiting for you.